Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for MSI Main Bracket Stage Day number 8. It is a good day. It is the second of the two lower bracket round number 2 series. We are going to find out the final team to enter the top 4 of MSI today, and it's a very, very fun series. North America versus the LCK has always been a little bit of an uphill battle for NA, but, you know, there have been some upsets at this tournament, and I think a lot of people are looking at this as a potential interesting series to watch. Of course, we will preview that, but I want to know what you guys thought down in the comment section below. I want to know what you thought was going to happen in this series. Did it live up to your expectations? Did either team play above or below what you anticipated? Just let me know all your thoughts on everything MSI related down in the comment section below. If you want to know my thoughts heading into this series, you can check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. Of course, in that playlist is every single MSI game being given this overview treatment like we are going to do in today's video, including the previous round where we not only talked about G2 taking down Top Esports, but also previewed this series in particular at the end. We're going to cover some of those points in this video, but for the most part, it's going to just be talking about the series itself. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and at the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be previewing winners finals at the end of today's episode. That's the series that we are going to get tomorrow, but of course, that preview will only be a couple of minutes. It's going to be a little bit shorter. Most of today, like we said, will be spent on this lower bracket round number 2 series to see who that final team will be to make top 4. So let's get into it. There's a lot to talk about with this series. There's a lot to preview with this series. You can already see the two teams up on your screen now. It's a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LCK in T1 and the number 1 seed from the LCS in Team Liquid. Very, very fun matchup. I think both of these teams have positives and negatives. You know, Team Liquid has performed almost identically to how I expected them to at this tournament. Maybe I didn't expect them to, like, destroy Fnatic, but I don't think it was unreasonable to say they could beat them. I think a lot of people saw that as an upset. I had Team Liquid and Fnatic with literally identical grades coming into this tournament. In fact, I don't think I've had two teams as evenly matched in any region as Team Liquid and Fnatic were for me coming into this tournament. Was a bit of a shock to see Team Liquid just be better across the board, but certainly wasn't a surprised to see them win that series. I think that was super reasonable for them, and I think they are on a bit of a hot streak right now. A couple of the players that you were more worried about are actually playing pretty well at this tournament. The positives domestically were top and bot. That was the formula. They were the lanes that kind of got Team Liquid ahead and put them in good positions. A lot of the time, specifically bot lane for me, Yeon and Core were definitely the stars of their playoff run and were the reason they were able to walk out as LCS champions. Yeon has been very good, I would say, at this tournament. Again, only 2 series, but the one that he played against not Jackie Love was really good. He was just dominating Fnatic's bot lane, which I guess could have been expected. You know, we had them rated higher than Fnatic's bot lane going into the tournament, but Yeon really showing that a lot of that lane dominance that he was able to have domestically can carry over internationally if he is given good matchups. Certainly something to monitor, but Guma, Yushi, and Keria are definitely a bit of a different challenge, much closer to Jackie Love and Mako than they are to Noah and Jun. So definitely going to be interesting to watch and see whether Yeon and Core can continue to live up to their 2v2 dominance. They're such an integral part of what Team Liquid does that they kind of need to win in order for this team to have a shot. I think it's possible. I think they're that good in the 2v2, but we're going to have to watch and see. And then topside was obviously the positive for them domestically. Impact was very good in lane in particular. In the 1v1s domestically this year, he was really a positive. I think that's going to be potentially something that continues here. He's a little bit more feast or famine than I think people give him credit for. He has been for the past 3 or so years. Ever since he left Team Liquid the first time, it really felt like he has kind of just changed his game into being a lot more of a, like, volatile top laner, which is fine. You're going to get a lot of good plays out of him, but there are also going to be some games that are pretty bad from Impact, and you just kind of have to live with that. He has not handled lane swaps as well as some other top laners. That's definitely something worth noting. But I think the big positive for Liquid is just how well Umti and APA played in that previous series. APA in particular was excellent. He was player of the series against Fnatic, and if he steps up, if he's just, like, neutral in this series against Faker, which, you know, we'll talk about it. Faker's form right now leads me to believe that that's not, like, an impossible thing to ask. If APA is neutral, and if you can get Yeon popping off, if Impact can have a good series, if Umti can control the game, like, Liquid can take games off of T1. That's not impossible, but T1 are definitely going to be favorites going into this series. To me, this is not G2 taking on Top Esports, where, you know, Top Esports were favorites for me in that series because I didn't like the matchup. You know, people were talking about how Hans was really good in lane. It just didn't feel like that was going to be the case in a lane swap meta, but TES decided to play it a lot more standard, a lot more regular, and they lost because of it. But even then, like, Caps is better than Cream, and Yike is just as good as Tion, and, like, you could have expected G2 to be a little bit more relevant. This isn't the same circumstance. Team Liquid is definitely a bit worse than G2, and even if T1 is probably playing on the same level as a team like Top Esports right now, I don't know if, like, T1 should be considered anything other than favorites. Yes, Faker's in a little bit of a down state right now. We're in a position where we're watching him play probably the worst League of Legends he's ever played in his career, at least in terms of, like, a 10-game stretch. I can't remember a tournament where he's been as bad as he has been at MSI. Zeus likes to flip games for absolutely no reason. Owner certainly is going to have some good and some bad. Guma and Keria weren't perfect in that previous series against Billy. Them getting outplayed is a big reason why they lost, but there's still enough positives on this team where I look at it and I go, well, where exactly do Team Liquid get their advantages? I think if Guma and Keria have a good series, I don't see Team Liquid winning a lot of games. I think Jan is simply just too integral to how Team Liquid want to play the game. As long as Faker can survive in the mid lane, I think this should be fine. My prediction for this series, I believe, was T1 3-0, T1 3-1. I expect them to not really have a ton of trouble in this series. I think it would be more disappointing for them if they did have a lot of trouble considering how they've looked up until this point, but maybe Team Liquid can pull a game off. I certainly wouldn't be the most surprised person in the world if they could do that. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the games. Going game by game means we get to start with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was T1. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0. And this is kind of what you expected from T1. Some, ups and downs in the early game. They've been a pretty weak early game team, all things considered, over the course of this year. Their strength has obviously been like that mid to late game transition where they are very strong, but their early games have been pretty inconsistent, and Team Liquid was able to take advantage of that. They got quite a bit of gold on Jan in a really nice fight down in Bot River, and they were finding good picks. Impact was doing a really good job on the Cassante of continuing to put pressure onto T1, but again, you fall into the T1 danger zone. We talk about this all the time, basically every single time this team plays on this channel, where 20 to 28 minutes in the game, that's where T1 gets all of their advantages, and that's where they're able to actually win games. That's the time period in which they play like a world-class team, even if they're not world-class in a lot of other areas, and that happened again here, where that 20 to 28 minute mark, things just started to spiral out of control for Liquid, who just couldn't hang on, and really it just became a bit of a problem. They lose one fight, and now they're down 8k gold, and it is what it is. You gotta live with that. Player of the game for me is gonna go to Faker in the mid lane. A lot of attention put into the middle of this matchup. APA was ganked over and over and over again by Owner in the early game. I mean, completely camped. And, this is the right strategy for T1. If is going to play Xin Zhao like it's the scaling jungler that needs farm and stacks in order to win, then yeah, take advantage of that and go mid lane and try to punish APA's comfort pick that isn't strong in the early game. This is the right decision. We'll talk about why I don't think APA did anything particularly wrong in this game. I actually think he was maybe the best performing player on Team Liquid in terms of like individual mechanics, but you got to give Faker a lot of credit. We were really critical of him in the previous couple of series. He was bad against Billy. He needed to be better against G2, where quite frankly, in a lot of games, he was outplayed by Caps. He stepped up here in game number 1. I thought he was very valuable on the Taliyah, not only getting those early advantages, but his ability to play the map was really good. The teleports were always really well timed. His ability to catch important members with seismic shoves in the late game was huge, specifically APA in a lot of instances. He was just kind of on his game. Wasn't a super flashy game. We've seen Faker at better games than this, but I think this was a bit of a team effort in the late game, and Faker was definitely the one I was noticing the most. The other player that I considered here was Owner for player of the game. I thought the Poppy was really positive. Poppy's actually been a really strong pick at this tournament. What a shock. Poppy is strong literally every single time she's played, but Owner in particular had a really good idea of what he wanted to do in the early game. Typically speaking, you're not going to see Poppy just out pressure a Xin Zhao in the early game, but was really bad in terms of the way that he wanted to play the game here, and Owner took pretty big advantage of that. Zeus was blowing people up in the late game, even if he did struggle a bit in the mid game of not dying inside lanes, and Guma and Keria were generally fine, even if the Senna had very low impact overall, but Owner and Faker definitely the carry points here, and I think that that's definitely going to be something to monitor, because we talked about Guma and Keria needing to be kind of the standouts. If you are going to go for kind of the more standard Senna plus, whatever, down in the bot lane that Guma loves to play, that T1 loves to kind of just scale into the late game with, I actually think that opens up Team Liquid to have more options, more opportunities in this series. I think T1 got lucky that Owner and Faker were so strong heading into the mid game here that their fights were a lot easier, because I think if this game was more neutral heading into 10 to 15 minutes, Team Liquid was already winning fights. They were already getting gold on members. If APA wasn't super far behind, I actually think it's possible that Team Liquid could just kind of run away with this mid game. So, credit to the jungle mid. I think they're the reason they ended up winning this game. But for TL, again, just kind of close, right? There were a couple of good moments. I think most of this team played well this game. Impact, I think, had a pretty solid one on Cassante. That's obviously been this team's big champion over the course of this tournament. I don't really see any reason to go in any other direction. Impact is very clearly very comfortable on Cassante, so keep playing it. APA was generally fine on Aurelion Sol, especially in the late fights. He just didn't have the gold to actually be able to 1v9 like that champion is supposed to. And Yan and Core, I think, were good. Yan in particular, definitely trying to play a bit more aggressive. That's what you need to do. You need to play with confidence. You need to play on the edge of danger. But Umti was just so bad in this game. He's going to get dead of the game. You know, it's not a secret that I'm low on Umti on this channel. I just don't really feel like he is the kind of jungler that everybody thinks he is. And you know, he's kind of known for his dynamic early games, at least at times, or that's what he was known for in the LCK, but there are also games where he just plays so slow in situations where it's absolutely unjustified. You're playing Xin Zhao, Kalista, Alistair, like, you need to keep your foot on the gas, and Umti played as if he was playing Viego or Belveth or one of these, or Nocturne, or one of these champions that can't do anything in the early game. You have to be more aggro than what he was in this game. You have to be a lot more impactful, and even in the late fights, he was constantly getting targeted down first because they realized that he was out of position super regularly. It just was a bad game from Umti. I think it was way worse than the scoreline would indicate. You would look at these scorelines and say that APA ran it down. I think Umti was very much the problem here for Team Liquid, and I think if he's going to play like this, they don't have a shot in this series. He has to step up. We talked about jungle mid needing to be a positive. Well, APA was left out to dry the entirety of this game, and Umti did absolutely nothing about it, and that simply has to be better. I think there are positives. Yan and Impact do look like they can carry over some of those positives that they had in the previous series into this one. I just want to see more attention put in the bot lane early on in games. Yan did a good job in the mid game of staying relevant and trying his best to continue the fight, especially into the scaling bot lane, but you've got to punish the Senna more if they're going to go for something like that. You can't really allow him, or Guma in this case, to just scale into the late game for free. So, you know, for Team Liquid, I do think that there are positives, but a lot of negatives and a lot of brain lapses for me in game number 1 as well. But for T1, you want to go up 2-0. You want to be able to control this series. If you're up 2-0, you feel pretty good about winning one of the final 3 games against Team Liquid. But if TL can win game number 2, can even up this series, all of a sudden things look a lot better. There are enough positives in this game number 1 to show that they could win a game if everything goes right. So, which one of those things is going to happen? Well, the winner of game number 2 was T1. They are going to take game number 2 and go up 2-0 in this series. What a banger. I mean, this was an awesome game. I really recommend you check this out if you haven't. I know I don't really talk about that a lot anymore. I used to give like game recommendations, especially during like the weekly reviews. I would talk about the games that I thought were the most interesting that I would recommend you go and watch if you haven't already. I assume you're watching the games at MSI. If you're not, go watch this game. This was a banger, and it's unfortunate that Team Liquid lost it because I think this was super winnable for them. Not that they were ever in the lead really at any point. T1 should have controlled a lot of this mid to late game, but TL just did such a good job of fighting front to back in a lot of these instances, with the exception of a couple of players, that they kept themselves in this game. And I know the gold lead looks massive. I know, you know, the kill difference is like big, and I know on paper it doesn't look like this was as close as it was, but this came down to a 50-50 smite fight. Like, without Elder Dragon, like, I think if Team Liquid gets that Elder on the 50-50, I think they win that fight with the Samira, and I think they actually just win the game. Like, I really think it's that much of a, you know, 50-50 game ends kind of moment that unfortunately just goes in favor of T1 if you're a TL fan. But great game from T1, all things considered. Do I want them to be more clinical in the late game? Absolutely. This team still has some major problems, and they had a couple of players who I think really underperformed here, but you know who didn't? Faker in the mid lane. He's going to get player of the game, and maybe people are going to be like, how can you give Faker player of the game for game number 2? I understand that he had 1 or 2 fights where it's like, you needed to be a little bit safer there. Like, getting picked off by Yan right after getting Baron, I think, is a pretty big mistake from Faker. I think that really did hurt them in the long run, but the fights that they won because of Faker. Like, every fight that was integral in this game that, you know, T1 ended up getting, they got because of an RH arm, or they got because of the damage that he was able to put out flanking the backline. He was so integral towards their successful plays that he simply has to be player of the game to me, even if he wasn't perfect throughout the entirety of the game. I think some people are going to look at Gumayushi and say that he should get player of the game. He was good. Didn't really do a whole ton in this game. I think the Deathless scoreline is a little bit misleading in terms of his positioning. He was playing really safe a lot of this game. I think he was very scared of the Samira. He was basically just a Q-bot for a lot of this game, which is fine. Like, you can get away with that if you're Gumayushi, but it just didn't mean that he had a huge impact on the game, and he was not the better AD carry in this game. That I will definitely say. Zeus was good on the Vayne, tried to pull some stuff back. This is a champion that he has definitely favored over the last couple of weeks. It's interesting to see that that has kind of been the development for him, but he could have, again, been more aggressive, I think, in some of these fights. And then Owner and Keria, a couple good moments, couple bad moments. I think generally Keria was most notable for the ults this game, which allowed Guma to survive some exchanges that he just wasn't in a good position for. And, you know, Owner has a lot of deaths, but I think a lot of that was him, like, sacrificing his life to try to get kills on important members of the enemy team. For the most part, it was worth it, especially because he was able to secure a lot of the objectives in the last half of the game. But, you know, not the cleanest game of all time from T1. You want to see this team dominate this series, and they're just not. Team Liquid looks like an equal. They just look like they're just barely not able to get over the hump. And unfortunately for TL, like, maybe you had the player of the game. Like, I don't do player of the game on losing teams. I do that, like, for series. I think it's fair to say, like, oh, you know, the best player in this series was on the losing team, but was Yan the best player in this game? Like, the dude dominated on Samira. He single-handedly kept Team Liquid in this game. I'm not going to say single-handedly because Impact also had a really phenomenal game on the Cassante. He was constantly a problem. He, quite frankly, could not die. In the late game, there was nothing that they could do to try to stop him, but Yan was, like, legit winning fights for the team, constantly finding picks on priority targets, whether it was Faker, whether it was Keria. Like, there was a lot of moments where Yan was just winning fights, and he played super well in this game. His positioning was near perfect. He got gold in the early game. Yan was an elite level 80 carry in this game. And again, that was the win condition for Team Liquid. It's really good to see him step up when he really needs to. The Samira pick obviously is going to get people talking and get people excited. Yan's always been a bit of a Samira player, you know, going back to his solo queue days, but I never thought he was going to pull it out in this scenario. I think it can work in the right situation. Your team has to know how to play around a champion like Samira, but it very much worked here where Yan was just ridiculously strong. The problem was that the weak links were just a little bit too weak in this game. Dead of the game is once again going to go to Umti. I'm not going to sit here and say that he is single-handedly losing them this series, but he is holding them back, and it's really... It's unfortunate, right? Like, I know I've gone on record, especially with his time in the LCK, and said, like, I'm not on the Umti hype train. I went against, like, popular opinion when he was on Bro for a lot of years and was like, I don't think he's very good. Like, I just don't think he's a great player, and you see that when he has to play, like, actual good competition. His pathing is a lot worse than the people that he is playing against right now, and his team fighting is horrendous on the Lee Sin. Of course, that champion, if you're not playing from ahead, is going to be a bit worse, but... You know, even the one Baron that they did get, it wasn't secured by Umti. He was dead before the fight started. They just played it really well and were able to get Owner's GA before they took the Baron. Like, Umti was just not relevant in this game. He essentially missed on every objective that he went for. His team fighting wasn't good. There's just not a lot of positives to give. Core JJ was also really bad, though. If Core had played well, I actually think Team Liquid win this game. Or if Umti had played well, I think Team Liquid win this game. I really do think that's how small the margin was for me that, you know, kind of separated TL from T1 in this one. Core was just... weak. One of the weaker games that we've seen from him in a while. I wasn't stunned by his mechanics domestically. In fact, I talked about that a lot when we did the LCS weekly reviews. You know, Core has definitely been a bit more of an up and down player over the course of this year, but this was a down, and that's unfortunate. APA had a couple of moments where he got caught out. I think he was generally fine, but he also was way too far forward in a couple of situations, you know, trying to make that roam top lane and just getting caught out for no reason. That's a play that just can't happen at the top level. So even if Impact and Yan were very good, Yan in particular was a star in this game, it just wasn't enough. And for TL, you're now down 0-2. You have to reverse sweep T1 to move on to top 4. It's looking pretty out of reach right now. Hopefully you can win game 3 and at least stay alive for one more game. But for T1, you feel lucky to be up 2-0. This team has not played perfect. This team has not played immaculately, but they played good enough, and they've done the things that they're supposed to do in order to win these games. You want to complete this in a sweep. You want to feel at least a little bit confident going into top 4, because I do think there is some question marks surrounding this roster, but are they going to be able to complete the sweep, or are Team Liquid going to be able to at least take one game and show that in the best circumstance, they actually can take a game off of the LCK? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Team Liquid. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to, at the very least, take one game in this series and prove that it's at the very least possible for North America to be able to take down the LCK in a game. This was really good stuff from Team Liquid. There are a lot of positives to take away from this game. Another really close one. This was very back and forth. This wasn't a blowout. This wasn't Team Liquid running over the entire game. This was a back and forth kind of affair where TL just had better macro. Quite frankly, that was the big difference in this game, is that T1's macro was a lot slower. Their rotations to a lot of these objectives were a lot slower, and Team Liquid, because of that, was actually be able to generate gold leads in situations that they really had no business generating gold leads in. They were able to control all of the objectives. And because of that, they were able to win fights. Even if not every single fight that they had, not every single front-to-back 5v5 was perfect. You know, T1's still probably better mechanically in a lot of cases. They were in better positions for a lot of these fights, which allowed players like Yan and APA a lot more space to be able to operate early on. I also think they got much better performances out of the players that had really been struggling at the start of the series in T1. Quite frankly, had a very weird draft, like a draft that I'm really not a huge fan of. I think it's a lot of risk. I understand game 3, you're up 2-0. Maybe you can take a couple of those risks in draft, but, you know, a couple of champions that I just don't really think ever were going to work out in this situation. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to APA in the mid lane on this Taliyah. Led the game in damage, and it was very clear watching it why. He was constantly involved in every single fight. I thought his positioning at times was a little bit too far back. I think you can play on the edge of danger as Taliyah a little bit more than you can on other champions just because of her kit. In general, you have so much inbuilt self-peel and ability to keep yourself alive in a lot of these fights, you know, not even taking into account the fact that you have, you know, Flash in a lot of these skirmishes. I think APA could have been a bit more aggressive, but when he did go aggressive, when he was looking for a lot of these engages, it was very clear, you know, that Taliyah is a very strong champion. Again, I cannot fathom why people continue to pick Corki into Taliyah. This has been something that has been omnipresent at this tournament as a quote-unquote counter pick, and every single time Taliyah obliterates the Corki first in every single fight, and I just don't understand. Corki is such a useless champion. We will get into it in just a second, but APA was excellent here. This was carryover from the Fnatic series, and just generally what he showcased there. I think APA has been a player that if you didn't know about him before, you better know about him now. I know there's been a lot of talk about small champion pools and whether or not he can ever be elite. This guy is one of the best mid laners to come out of North America in a little while, and I'm really happy to see the development and the growth that he's made. Same thing can be applied to Yan, who has been excellent in this series. He was almost single-handedly winning them game number 2, and the Callista was very valuable here in game number 3. His team fighting is so good on this champion, which is not something that you would necessarily expect, not only because of the champion, but because of the player as well. Yan is not known for his team fighting. He is not tactical. Like, that is not the kind of player that he is for this team. He is somebody that really does rely on the 2v2 advantages early on in games, and, you know, it's good to see that when he gets it, he can still be super relevant in the back half. His team fighting was very good. Core was way better on the Nautilus in game 3 than he was in game 2, where it was a bit of a disaster. T had his best game of the series by far here on the Rek'Sai. A couple of really crucial knockups. I still don't think he was perfect, was a little far forward and maybe a bit disconnected in some of the fights, which allowed T1 to actually play a bit more aggro, but sometimes that was actually in TL's favor. So, you know, I'm not going to criticize him too heavily, and Impact is unkillable on this Cassante. He is just going to spam this champion until someone proves that they can take him off of it, but you know, good for Team Liquid to be able to win a game against T1. You know, I think going into the tournament, if you would have said that that was going to happen, that would have been considered a pretty big positive, all things considered, for TL. I think obviously they're in a position where they are already a little bit happy to be here, and I think winning a game and looking competitive in both of the last 2 games against T1, it's a really, really encouraging sign for this team. But for T1, like, yeah, I'm a bit concerned, and maybe I'm just going to sit here and chalk it all up to draft. Like, I'm not a draft guy. If anybody who's followed the channel over the past couple of years knows, I say very, very commonly on this channel that draft is like 20% of the equation, like 20 to 25% of the equation, and gameplay is like, you know, 75, 80% of the equation. It's not equal. Like, gameplay matters significantly more. A good team can make a bad draft look good. A bad team can make a good draft look bad. It just kind of is what it is. But T1's draft certainly didn't do them any favors in this game. Vayne plus Corki as your solo lane duo, I think, is ridiculously unnecessary. I get that Zeus has some sort of fetish with Vayne right now as the counter to Cassante. I get the idea behind it. It's not working so far in this series. Like, Vayne has just kind of been there. You know, you're not shutting down the Cassante. You're not making him less useful in the late game. So what's really the point here? The Vayne's not really going to be able to keep your team in a positive situation. And then you've got the Corki, and I'm going to be honest, I'm going to die on this hill. Like, if this is the hill I have to die on when it comes to draft, then I will die on this hill. I don't think Corki is just weaker than the other options. I think Corki is borderline unplayable at the pro level right now. I genuinely think this champion does absolutely nothing other than pad your damage stats. Like, you look at the end of the game and you see big number and you go, ooh, Corki, good champion. And then you watch him in the game and it's like, none of this damage matters. His kit doesn't matter. You have to play super aggro, but he has no tools to keep himself safe. This champion is just useless useless in the game right now, and we've seen it super consistently. For some reason, teams seem to think Corki is a counter to Taliyah of all champions. No, I'm sorry. Taliyah is so much more useful in the early game, obviously, in the mid game, obviously, but when Corki's supposed to be strong in the late game, well, Taliyah just has more utility to do more things. I just don't understand the idea behind this, and Faker's gonna get done of the game for it. I don't even think every single play that he made was horrendous. I think some of them were absolutely horrendous, but a lot of it I can notch up to this champion is just bad. Like, it's not even just below average. This champion is bad, and I think we've consistently seen it not only over the course of this tournament, but over the course of the summer or the spring playoffs as well. Like, this champion has not performed well under any circumstance. It is constantly getting outplayed and oututilized by other better picks in similar roles. I just don't get it. I don't understand what people see in Corki. It's literally just Chovy. Chovy wins on this champion, and no one else wins on this champion. Not Faker, not Knight, not any of the other best mid laners in the world. This is not a good champ, and people continuously prioritize it, and it just astounds me. But outside of that, Keria was also inting the entirety of this game. One of the worst games he's had at the whole tournament, I would say. He's been their best player, I would say, over the course of the whole tournament. Gumayushi definitely, is up there as well, but Keria, to me, has been the most consistent. This was bad. Like, he was constantly inting, just, taking that Hex portal right into the middle of Team Liquid and just dying instantly. That's something you would see out of Fnatic in the previous series. It's not what you want to see out of one of the best teams in the world. Guma's scoreline looks okay. He didn't die a lot, but he was also entirely useless in this game. He didn't do any damage and was never really involved in any of the fights. He was trying to find flank angles on the Varus, very confusing stuff, but overall T1 just wasn't as good. The macro in particular, very concerning, where they're supposed to be better than Team Liquid. They just weren't. They were making poor decisions, and TL did a good job of capitalizing on it. It doesn't completely change the fate of this series. TL still is, they still have their back against the wall at the very least. Like, that is the minimum you can say, but if TL now goes out and wins game number 4, especially if they do it in a similar way where their macro's better, like, T1's definitely going to be on the back burner in that regard. So big game number 4, can T1 show that the TL win was just a little bit of a consolation prize, or is TL actually going to be able to tie up this series, keep the reverse sweep alive and send us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was T1. They are going to take game number 4. They're going to close out this series in 4 games, winning 3-1. They are moving on now to, I guess, the lower bracket semifinals, the top 4, if you will, and Team Liquid's MSI run is unfortunately over. North America's MSI run is unfortunately over, but it was a really good effort from Team Liquid. Maybe not so much in this game. Games 2 and 3 in particular, very fun, very back and forth. This series was a blast to watch. Even game 1, Team Liquid had their moments. Unfortunately, it did all come down to this game 4 where they kind of got blasted. It was never particularly close. T1 even gave them some free shutdowns towards the latter half of the game just to make things look a little bit more interesting on the post-game screen, but, Team Liquid just wasn't in this one, and it's a bit of an unfortunate way to end what was a really fun series leading up into this, but T1 definitely recovering some of their miscommunication problems. They were everywhere on the map in this game, and I do think their macro was significantly better here in game 4 than it really was at any other point in this series. Game number 1 had a couple of really positive plays, but game 2, game 3, they needed to be a lot more locked in terms of the decisions that they were making, and it felt like game 4 was kind of the turning point mentally in that case. I think this comp is significantly more coherent than what they had in some of their recent performances, especially game number 3, and I think that really helped out a lot, but generally, I think just going back to comfort, allowing players to play the things that they know that they are good at is going to help. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game and player of the series, maybe controversially, is gonna go to Faker for me in the mid lane. I don't really know why this would be a controversial take. I don't know how you can watch their 3 wins and not say that Faker was the most important player on T1 in this series. When he was playing well, they won. When he was playing poorly, they lost. And he played mostly well in this series. I get that game number 3 was kind of bad from him, but again, as we talked about in kind of the analysis of that game, a lot of that was Corki to me. Corki is just not a playable champion. You put him on something like Orianna where he can win it, he's just straight up better than APA. We saw that in the first 2 games as well when he was allowed to play other champions that we know he can pilot like the Taliyah. So I am going to give him the player of the series as a whole. I do think this makes me feel a bit better about him. I'm not super all in on him just yet. This still has been a very weird tournament for him, all things considered. I don't think he's been consistent really at all, and I need to see that consistency translate into a matchup that, quite frankly, isn't APA, who at times in this game was making gigantic like mental errors and just giving over free gold to T1. I need to see Faker actually do that against a mid laner like, I don't know, Caps, who's not going to give over a lot of those resources, and he will have the opportunity to avenge kind of what he was in that first series against Caps later this week. But, you know, at least for now, at least against Team Liquid, Faker was very good. I think they gave player of the series on broadcast to Gumayusi. I don't understand that really, like, at all. No offense to Gumayusi, he was fine, but Yon was probably the better AD carry in this series across these 4 games, at least in terms of impact. Guma was just kind of along for the ride in games 2, 3, and 4. Like, I guess game 3 you can look at and be like, he was the only one who didn't int, but he also didn't really do anything positive for that team, and he was along for the ride here in game 4. He got 2v2 killed in the bot lane and was getting picked off, rotating in a lot of instances. And then you look at game number 2, which they also were able to win. He was probably the least important member of the team in that game as well, where he didn't really do a whole ton. He was kind of just along for the ride again. Don't really understand the Gumayusi player of the series narrative, but if the broadcast wanted to give it to him, great. I thought Owner was very good here in game number 4. The Poppy is just such a shutdown pick. Again, I don't know why teams aren't prioritizing this champion more. It's super good in the current meta. And also, it can be flexed. Like, most teams can play a top lane. Some teams can even play at support. So, Poppy being prioritized so late in drafts and getting through pick ban in a lot of instances, it is a bit surprising. Owner looked amazing in both games 1 and 4, and those were the 2 Poppy games of this series. So, I imagine that will be something that kind of continues. Zeus probably had his best game of Vayne here. He's definitely got a little bit of a fascination with the champion as a counter to Cassante. I don't think it's always going to be relevant, but hey, whatever Zeus feels comfortable on, that's really all you want from him, is just to feel comfortable, because he can make really big plays happen when he's not just out of his comfort zone, out of his relevancy. Carrier was okay, the Ornn was fine in this game, but generally this was Faker, this was Owner, and this was Zeus to me in game number 4, which is a really good sign, I think, all things considered. They move on now to take on G2, the winners of the other round number 2 lower bracket series. It's a rematch of round number 1. I'm super excited to see where that goes. We're not going to preview that quite today because it's not tomorrow's series, but we're definitely going to talk about where I think that series could go. I don't know if T1 are going to be favorites going into that. It's certainly going to be an interesting conversation, but let's talk about Team Liquid. This is the end of their MSI run. It was a bit of an unfortunate end. Again, like we said, they put up a good fight in the series, just not so much in game number 4 here. Dead of the game, pretty obviously to me, is going to go to Core JJ. The dude was like, he hit level 6 at like 18 minutes into this game. He was roaming all the time, and I get it. That's what you want to do on Rel. That's like the classic Core JJ thing of just being everywhere on the map, but being not level 6 for a majority of this game, like literally until 5 minutes before the game ended, that's a disaster. I think he ended the game at level 8 or something like that. You can't get away with that. Like, he was not good. He was stealing kills from Yon in the early game. I know their 2v2 was very positive, but Yon played those 2v2 fights perfectly, and I'm not really sure Core was, like, the person to make that happen. He was good, I would say, especially before level 3, but the moment he started roaming, the moment things started to go wrong for Team Liquid. So Core is going to get dead of the game for me. I don't think he was particularly great in this series. And the same thing could be said about Umti. Very bold to pull out the Lilia here in game number 4. Maybe it's comfort. We really haven't seen this from him professionally, and so I'm not really going to make that call. I think this is a bad pick, all things considered, on R5, but, you know, for Umti, you just needed to be a bit better. His mechanics, he just kind of got outplayed in a lot of these fights. I remember there was a bot river fight where he just couldn't hit Zeus. Like, it was literally impossible for him to touch the Vayne, and that's just not what you want if you're Lilia. You need to be able to land your abilities in order for that champion to be useful. What a shocking concept. Impact also, probably his worst game of the series here. APA made a couple of big mental errors, was just pushed up way too far, showing no respect to T1. That teleport on the top side when Impact was about to go down is one of the worst plays that they could have made in that particular instance, and it really cost their team. And then poor Yon. Yon was unbelievably good again in this game. I think, again, if you surround him with a better team, he could have won this game. Like, he was in a decent position. They get that 2v2 kill. His team fighting was actually really solid. He was able to pick up some trade kills in a lot of these instances, getting shutdowns, getting good opportunities. It just didn't really matter. Yon was the best player on Team Liquid by a large margin, not only in this series, but at this tournament as a whole. Anybody who watched him domestically this year in particular wouldn't have been shocked by that. He was, like I said, the driving force of Team Liquid in their playoff run, was finals MVP, was really good for TL, but to see that translate internationally is such an encouraging thing. To see the laning in particular translate internationally, to see him survive in a lot of these fights and be very useful, it's just a good sign that Yon can actually be a player that even continues to grow and becomes, you know, one of the best ADs that North America has had. I think that that is certainly a potential, you know, outcome for Yon, a player that I've always liked coming through the development system. So for Liquid, yes, you go out here, but I would still consider this tournament a pretty big success. You learned a lot about your team. And remember, like, I know this is going to be kind of a weird concept, but Team Liquid wasn't even supposed to be at MSI, not only in terms of like how they finished in the regular season or anything like that, but even going back to like preseason predictions, this was like a borderline top 4 team in the LCS, and they went on to win the LCS, shock everybody. In, you know, after the regular season, they weren't particularly well looked after. I predicted them to lose both of their first series, to not win a playoff series domestically. They go on to win the championship, and they show up here, they beat Fnatic, they win a game off of T1. There are a lot of positives to take away from this Team Liquid run, even if you maybe wanted to see it go a little bit better at the end. Overall, I don't think you can look at this as anything other than a success for this team, who could still potentially grow into the future. But for T1, you're moving on now to face G2. Like we said, big series, really important that you get into the top 3. This is going to be kind of the make or break as to whether or not this was a successful MSI for T1. If you can win that series against G2, make it into the semifinals, even if you don't make MSI finals, I think you're going to feel pretty good about that, because the top 2 teams in the world feel very strong right now. But if, you know, for some reason they can't get the job done, I think people are going to look at some of the games, even here in the Team Liquid series, and see some of the flaws that T1 had. So big break point coming up for them, but at least they were able to survive this one. All right, but that is going to do it for my MSI day number 8 overview and analysis video. That is the end of the lower bracket round number 2. We know the top 4 teams left at MSI. Only 4 remain. You've got T1 and G2, as we talked about, down in the lower bracket. They will face off to see who goes on to those lower bracket finals, the semifinals, if you will. But tomorrow, we get the big one. Winners finals, the 2 teams that have yet to lose a series here at MSI. It's the number 1 seed from the 2 big regions, from the LCK and the LPL, Gen G and Bilibili Gaming. I'm super excited for this matchup. Not only are these probably the 2 best teams in the world right now, but we finally get the first ever matchup between Chovy and Knight. To me, 1A and 1B, the 2 best players in the world going head-to-head for the first time ever here at MSI. I'm so stoked for this series. I really do think it could go either way. I think they each have their strengths. Gen G definitely more controlled, definitely a team that's going to play a bit slower, but probably going to be a bit more clinical in terms of their late game execution, especially if things are neutral heading into the late game. I trust their front-to-back 5v5 team fighting a lot, maybe the most of any team in the entire world, especially if Paze is on form, which he kind of has been at this tournament so far. If you're getting that version of Paze, I really do think that Gen G could just win every single 5v5 as long as they're able to neutralize the game early, but Bilibili is the better early game team. They're much more adept at being able to push advantages, and one thing that they really do well is actually push bot lane forward. They are really good at sending a lot of members and a lot of resources down into the bot lane to take away the enemy in that regard. They don't like lane swaps, so that could potentially be something to monitor, but if Paze can get shut down, if they put a ton of resources into turning this into a 4v5 and just getting Elk super far ahead, I could definitely see that as an avenue for winning. But again, if either Chovy or Knight are just phenomenal, if they just pop off, that could also be kind of a driving force. I think Canyon versus Shun is super interesting. I think Bin versus Keen is super interesting. I just think this is a great matchup between these 2 teams. My prediction is going to be Bilibili in 5. I'm going to stick to my guns. I think BLG is the best team at this tournament, but I don't feel super good about that. I think Gen G has been better so far at MSI, so I'm going to pick it in 5. I think my spread is BLG in 5, Gen G in 5. I think these are the 2 best teams in the world at the current moment, and I hope this series lives up to expectations. I hope it's not a blowout. I hope both of these teams really show up when it matters the most, but would love to know if you guys agree or disagree with my prediction down in the comment section below, and also let me know what you thought of the Team Liquid T1 series. Would love to know your thoughts on T1 moving forward and TL's run at MSI just in general. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about every single day of MSI here on this channel. We're also going to be covering all 4 of the major regions once again once summer starts, and so if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all